Big thank you. In my father's language, Deneza, Tsekuza, Skaiza, and in my mother's language, Tsamoigat, Tsimanak, Tsimawigat. I want to acknowledge the unceded, unsurrendered, continually occupied territory of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, for allowing us here and for allowing us to be guests within their territory. So I think it's really necessary for Indigenous peoples and for all of us to recognize, there's a really evolving and changing relationship with Indigenous peoples in Vancouver or in Coast Salish territory with governments and with other parties, including the Vancouver Canucks. And it's really important and it's really positive. It's good to see the relations that the Vancouver Canucks has with the Coast Salish people. I see you all wearing the orange shirts. If you don't know about why we have this national holiday of Orange Shirt Day, how it began was a story of a residential school survivor in Williams Lake. She was very young. I believe she was 5 years old. And she was brought to St. Joseph's Residential School in Williams Lake. She had her new clothes on going to the school, and part of her clothing was an orange shirt. However, when they brought her to the residential school, they stripped you of all your clothes. When the children were brought there, you weren't allowed to speak your Indigenous language. You were not allowed to practice your culture. The Government of Canada paid the church to take care of the schools, and the RCMP, or Canadian Mounted Police, 100 years ago, that really began to implement the policy of residential schools, took our children to these schools. And the purpose of these residential schools were very genocidal in nature. In the 100 years of the residential school system, there were well over 150,000 children that went to these schools. But the basic premise was to assimilate Indigenous peoples with the greater society, if you will, what is known as Canada. And it's really necessary as a part of truth and reconciliation, and especially about tomorrow, why we remember and commemorate the well over 150,000 children that went to residential schools. And we know a portion of that 150,000 didn't make it home. And this is why we say every child matters. Every child mattered back then, every child matters right now. For yourselves, gentlemen, I think you are the less than 1% of all the hockey players that are in the world that have the opportunity to lend your voice to things like this, to have a better understanding of the Indigenous peoples of Canada. I want to thank you all for allowing me to say a few words, and thank you to the Coast Salish people. Thank you. Masicho.